course! It's become a fairly common occurrence now to have at least one animated film a year whose very concept makes them targets of disdain and ridicule before the film even premieres, and I'd feel bad about this trend of prejudgment if it didn't seem like this was the actual goal of family film marketing. You all know now how unexcited I was at the prospect of this movie, even while acknowledging that its predecessor could be described as not terrible, because the trailer itself was pretty horrendous. Well, here's an interesting revelation. The worst parts of the trailers, the farting, the twerking, the no-ship Sherlock, none of that is in the movie. You know that claim I made some time ago about the only way companies think that animated film trailers can be effective is if they make the movie look as stupid as possible? That may not be 100% true, but you know what? 80% is starting to sound about right. Now, objectively, is this really a problem? What, compared to world famine? No. But aside that more people will inevitably watch the trailer than the movie, so just the fact that this exists and that so many have already been needlessly subjected to it, the depressing fact that this is how advertising is proven to work does inevitably mean that somewhere someone had a great innovative idea for an animated film that was shut down because it wasn't easily marketable, but Sherlock Gnomes greenlight that that inane title sells itself. And then after the fact tied it to a film that, despite having the same sort of end is nigh concept, is somehow not completely looked down upon years later. Because yeah, Romeo and Juliet, despite all the odds, is actually kind of okay. There's even bits of it that are kind of cute. Again, not good, just barely qualifying as okay. However, even in an ideal world, I would never bet that Sherlock Gnomes would in any way exceed this movie, but did it at least match it in tolerability? After all, after my long diatribe against the advertising, it must mean it's a gross misrepresentation, right? Okay, let's not go crazy, but I will give it this. If I could limit this film to only scenes that involve the main four characters, I could potentially describe it as flawed, but decent. Specifically for, not to give Johnny Depp too much credit, but Sherlock himself is a passable incarnation in that self-gratifying, emotionally stunted, shut up and let me be brilliant way. However, that core 4 story keeps consistently getting kneecapped by unpleasant and frequently pointless interruptions. From opening the film with a grocery list of other movie titles given the gnome pun treatment, just to remind you all of the other films they could make if we allow this film to make money, to the nurse frog going from occasionally annoying to consistently hatefully obnoxious, to dragging the plot to a screeching halt so that Mary J. Blige can make an underwhelming music video. And yes, like the first one, there are plenty of Elton John references and samples, but at least there they were montages that kept the story going. What is the purpose of this? Was it in our contract? Oh, but all that's dust bunnies compared to Moriarty. Animaniacs, Moriarty alone would make me question the sanity of the people who didn't leave immediately, including myself. And this is only about his character design. He's like a monstrous fusion of Boss Baby and a yellow Stay Puft Monster. He literally looks like a dancing ball of snot. He's supposed to be a pie mascot, but why? What led people to make this decision? Does Moriarty in the books have something to do with pies? Other than that, the ties into Sherlock's mythos are pretty weak. The mystery as it is mainly consists of finding card clues pointing to locations that pay barely adequate lip service to minor Sherlock references. Oh, that hound has a clue. I think he belongs to the Baskervilles. Yeah, that's the level of cleverness we're dealing with here. Man, that to be, not to be joke from the first one is a gutbuster compared to this. Oh yeah, and Mary J. Blige is Irene Adler. Isn't it just obvious? Oh, but here's the most amazing one. Some of you know now that I am tragically not able to see Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs until April 5th. It's also become the subject of a few articles about cultural appropriation, not entirely unsurprisingly. And while I know the situation isn't apples to oranges, I bet you that the people who wrote those articles didn't go see this movie, which means they didn't see what happens when we go into the Asian antique shop. The trailer doesn't show the worst examples of this, but Isle of Dogs would have to be be pretty bad to be worse than this. And then on top of everything else, I know that this will seem shocking, but this is not the most mind-bending mystery of all time. They pretty much do everything except light up a giant neon sign pointing to the eventual culprit, within the first 4 minutes, no less. However, to be fair, it's literally so obvious that the film itself seems to expect even children to guess who it is, so it counters that with a double twist that's only slightly less obvious, but still pretty obvious. Alright, so that's all the absolute worst stuff, and as I said earlier, the core story and characters could be perceived as decent, but even then, there are some issues. The character-oriented subplot is about taking your partner for granted, which is a perfectly adequate idea. A bit apparent, but suitable for a Sherlock-Watson conflict, but for Romeo and Juliet, it definitely could have been handled a lot better. So Romeo and Juliet are crowned the new garden leaders, and Juliet specifically gets super involved with the work and ignores Romeo's input. That's a reasonable thing to be irritated by, since he's also a leader. However, when he chooses to verbally complain, it's about how she's too focused on the job and not enough about their relationship. Ugh, you know that family film trope about parents that work too hard and that basically makes them the devil?
Oh, you're right, honey. If only we were unemployed and homeless, then we could spend all our time together.
But okay, there's times where people can take their loved ones for granted and get too wrapped up in their own stuff. But where this gets particularly stupid is when Romeo shames Juliet for daring to think Sherlock might have a better plan than him. Oh yes, how dare she think for herself and put faith in an experienced detective when their families have been abducted, rather than automatically siding with her boyfriend. But as said, the dysfunctional partnership is an okay idea. I just wish it could have been presented in a much more balanced way, with both of them learning a lesson instead of it all being Juliet's fault. She and Sherlock having to listen to others' input, and Romeo learning that sometimes things are more important than your possessive loyalty fetish. So was there anything here that I actually enjoyed? Well, the animation's alright, with mostly decent character designs, but oddly in the first one the characters had much more believable rough clay textures. Here everyone is a bit too polished. But there is this one bit where Sherlock's coat is flapping behind him and it does not even look remotely right. The cast is serviceable, but just the fact that Chiwetel Ejiofor is Watson is just so depressing. We haven't forgotten about you, Chiwetel. John Boyega is just a phase. You were in Serenity. I kind of like the conversation that Irene has with Juliet. You know, a man doesn't make you strong, but the right partner can make you stronger. A little forced, but I appreciated the sentiment. One thing I was prepared to hate on principle was when they hijacked the concept of Sherlock's mind palace. Okay, visualizations of mental processes are not exactly original, but regardless of what I thought, those segments were actually very nicely animated in the 2D traditional format, so yeah, those were easily the best bits. And full admittance that the last impression can be the most misleading, but it ended well. And by that I mean it had a mildly entertaining, competently executed third act conflict, as well as the fact that it did not end with a dance number. That's like the only thing it has on the first. And I meant what I said earlier, when Sherlock and Watson are center stage, slightly less so for the red versus blue couple, it can take itself somewhat ever so slightly seriously and be watchable. And then someone goes, oh right, it's a kid's movie, we need to throw in something stupid. So in conclusion, there are tinges of what made the first movie okay, but the fact that I've used the word okay so much in the context that I've used good for other movies says a lot. And for everything that's passable, it's still bogged down with so much pointless waste. Romeo and Juliet is no classic, but aside from some purposefully bad lines, it did capture some charm, and it hardly ever went out of its way to be intentionally juvenile, and you cannot say the same for this. Hey, I said it wasn't as bad as the trailer. I did not say none of the dumb clips were used. Oh yeah, and the intentionally bad marketing, that was apparently the most money anyone spent on film advertising for a time in March, by the way. Wasn't it just worth it? It's not bad enough to really be angry at, some elements aside, and certainly not enough to be associated with the tar pit that is Emoji Movie and Norm of the North, which is still miles away from being good, and it's still a forced sequel that only exists because it has a punny title. But honestly, if this is the worst thing I see this year, then this year's gonna be okay. Still, let's cleanse this experience by moving on to our new segment, Selspex's Recommendations. Firstly, I certainly hope that you all partook in some gorgeous Irish mythology animation in Secret of Kells or Song of the Sea for St. Paddy's Day. And a recent film I really liked that came out last year is Ethel and Ernest. You all are familiar with The Snowman, correct? Not the terrible Michael Fassbender movie, but the greatest Christmas special of all time, subjectively. Well, the man who wrote the initial picture book was Raymond Briggs, and Ethel and Ernest isn't just another one of his stories, it's literally the story of his parents. From the moment they met to the moment they stopped being alive. There's no clear narrative structure here, there's no climactic conflict, it's just a series of scenes about how they live their lives. It is the epitome of slice of life. The animation is absolutely beautiful, and it is oozing with charm. Oh, and also, are you watching Final Space? Because it's really good, and you should check it out. Till next time, comment, like, subscribe, etc., and you stay shiny, Animaniacs.
Here comes the night, here come the memories, lost in your arms, down in the foreign field, not so long ago, seems like eternity, the sweet afternoons still capture me.